Welcome to Watching Westworld, the officially unofficial podcast for Westworld on HBO. I'm Jim.
I'm A.Ron.
And today we're talking about Season 3, Episode 4, titled The Mother of Exiles. A.Ron, are you familiar with this quote?
No, but as soon as I looked into it, it's a very famous quote by Emma Lazarus, and it's inscribed at the base of the Statue of Liberty, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to recite it?
The entire poem?
Yeah.
If you'd like.
It's the 8 lines that are important to it says, here at a sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is imprisoned lightning, and her name is the Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. And then the famous part that everybody knows, give me your poor, you're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Is Dolores the Mother of Exiles? Who's she holding the lamp for?
Yeah, I mean, it really seems that way in this episode, that, she would be the one sort of kicking open the doors of freedom and opportunity and hope for her race. But every time I see this sort of on-the-nose reference, I sort of think, they're trying to make me think they're zigging when they're actually zagging.
Agreed.
And that someone else is going to be the Mother of
which
Exiles
my
here.
follow-up is, could you hammer this into a Maeve shape, that she is the one who literally guided the robots to a new promised land last episode, held the door open with her outstretched arm, and now she's trying to herself get back to the place that she helped so many others. I still have a lot of questions about that robot paradise. How is it? How can it run forever without human interference or assistance? Like, how permanent can it possibly be?
It's interesting that you bring that up. We'll get to that stuff. First, I want to know though, what'd you think of this episode on second watch?
So this show's always beautiful and fairly immaculate from a cinematography and acting standpoint. The more I watched it, because I watched this 3 times, I put it on background when I was doing my research, and I was paying particular attention to the stunts. I think the stunts are okay in this episode, but I think that we're just never going to get really sad. Like, you're not going to get John Wick out of this show.
No.
You're not going to get even 007 versus 006 Goldeneye out of the show. You're going to get basic television, CBS scripted fights out of this show. And that's fine if the writing is good. And in between my second and third watches, I came across, I read the weekly article that our buddy Kim Renfro over on Insider writes. And she pointed out this reference to this psychologist / AI researcher, Carl Friston. And I read an Associated Wired article, and it kind of blew my mind and opened up to what they might be trying to say in this show, which I think, that's one of the things that I've struggled to interface with. And I think you too, like, where the hell are they going with this? What are they trying to say? Well, if they're trying to say this, like, this thing instantly becomes a lot more fascinating. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the reference. But yeah, I'm like really high on this season so far. I think it's always been easy to look at and fascinating to watch, and extremely well acted. And now that I think I might have some kind of framework in which to watch the show and realize, oh, this is what they're trying to get at, I'm really excited for the possibilities. What about you?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think on second watch, this was better than I gave it credit for. And I actually didn't read that article until after I had watched it the second time. And so I did like a light third watch, but it was really more about like just things started to come together a little more, and I wasn't as concerned. Like, once they get this fucking Dolores thing out of the way, it's so much easier to just fall into this. And I wish they had done that earlier. I wish this had not been like the big mystery of this half season, and they had kept spooling that out. But
see, I think
once you get beyond that, I think things start to become even better. You can look at the things it's trying to say without the cloud of who is what, where is this happening, when is this happening, all that stuff.
I think that I would have felt like that if they had stretched it out further, but I feel like that they are doing much like Watchmen did before them, setting up these big central mysteries that are not the real mystery. It's to distract you from the thing that they're trying to say or keep you busy figuring that out while they're doing other things kind of in the background. Now, unfortunately, I think
The trouble is it distracts from everything, in my opinion.
I don't agree. But I mean, why do you I mean, we can discuss it if you want. Why do you think it distracts? It's
I
just
mean, it's the predominant conversation happening on the internet up until this point was who is, Hale, who is Martin. Like, that was what everybody was spending their energy on, and myself included. And you get wrapped up in that, and you start to lose sight of the bigger things, the more important and the more interesting things they're doing.
I guess that's one of the reasons I didn't read literally any theory about, who was in what body last week, because I'm just like, this isn't interesting, and it has.
But it's not just that. You almost need to know, because like, how am I to figure out what they're trying to say if I don't even know who the characters are?
I mean, I guess you continue watching the show. So I mean, yeah, if you get
Right,
bogged,
but how am I to get into the first 4 episodes if I don't know who's who?
I think if you don't do this podcast, I don't think you're even, you might be trying to figure out who's in what body, but is it, I don't know, is it the dominant question within? It's like you really can't process the rest of the scenes happening because all you can think about is who is Dolores.
It's not that I'm so distracted by it. It's that I have no frame of reference. How am I to figure out what they're trying to say if I don't know who the characters are?
Okay,
is my point. But so that really bummed me out after getting past that in this episode and finally having that reveal on the table. I think it's much better.
Well, like I said, I want to go back to I do think that, and maybe it's appropriate at this point, because rounding into the second half of the episode, it seems like the real mystery that we kind of uncovered in between week 2 and 3, but it's going to be the one that's evolving probably for the next 2 episodes until they have the big reveal that leads into the conclusion, is that we have a blend of the real world and the synthetic world, the simulated world, and we're seeing these scenes blended seamlessly. And there's a lot of hints in this episode that we're going to discuss that as we see them. I think that's the next one to figure out, is like, who is in what simulated reality, and why was it being simulated, and what were people hoping to learn, and what did they learn from the simulations? And what
are they trying to say with that?
And I hope that that says something profound about the nature of simulated versus real life, right, and like the futility of trying to control things. But we'll see.
Yeah, much like season 1 did, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, why don't we get into the recap of the episode?
Let's do it.
We start off with William back in his house. He's ranting and raving about Emily that he's seeing, but he thinks she's not real. She asks him how he would know if he was real and encourages him to finish the game by digging into his arm. And then Charlotte shows up to explain that Serac is taking over Delos to get the human data, and she needs his vote to allow a private investor to buy the company instead. Those private investigators, they make a lot of money, but not that much.
His name, Monsieur Gadget. And yes, wait until you see what pops out of his head when his limbic system.
Go Gadget wallet.
There's a lot of really cool thematic things that they're doing here. Some that are like really obvious. Like I really loved when Emily showed up and they blend, I think, her like hysterical dialogue trying to talk her dad out of killing her from last season with her kind of like just matter of fact affect, and made it really kind of like spooky and jarring, and kind of gave you that like unstuck in time. Or I wonder if they're suggesting, I don't know if it might be too early in the podcast to discuss whether if William is a host or he's stuck in a simulation already. But there's definitely that stuff that they're trying to bring out there. I feel like William might be a audience proxy at this point, and that he's asking, like he's calling, like when she's like, well, what if every choice you've ever made is no choice at all? What if it's all code? And he's like, nah, that's just Ford and his misanthropic bullshit, which is kind of my reaction when they just hit that so hard. Like, fuck you, you can't change as a person. Like, I've changed a lot as a person and all that. But then the thing I really thought was cool, and I noticed this from a Reddit post entitled Pentagram of Pearls, which is the chandelier that he looks up as the blood's dropping off of him. There's 5 kind of dark colored spheres And then the central one is a sixth one that's like the blood is dripping down, and visually it looks very similar to Bernard's pearl.
Mhm.
So it's like these five pearls, which are the Dolores clones with Bernard in the middle, and then it all comes crashing down on the William. I thought it was just really cool visual, almost subliminal storytelling that they're doing here, and it's the kind of shit that
Yeah.
like there's going to be 100 image post on Reddit with all the things that told us the things that were revealed in episode 8. That's going to be in the
Yeah.
top 10 for sure.
Uh,
Did you?
and this idea of free will that we've talked about before is brought up here pretty obviously when, Emily's like, oh, well, which is it? Do you have free will and you're evil, or are you blameless and helplessly enslaved? Which is always a question that, anybody who thinks about consciousness and free will is sort of confronted with.
Yeah, it's like
And it's kind of remarkable that a guy like this might be the first time he's confronted this idea,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Or I guess maybe this is the most severe confrontation he's had with it.
Yeah, it's like we
certainly has
said
to be
in the
aware of it.
instant podcast, if like life is deterministic and there is no free will, then like prisons are objectively immoral, you
Right.
know? But then again, they have to exist because none of us have free will to make any choice. So realizing that is not going to be a light bulb moment that frees the world, or sets all the it's which I don't know. I so at some point, what do you believe as far as free will versus?
I mean, I think we're pretty deterministic. I could see us. I don't know. So I'm not a quantum theorist either, and I'll admit to being damn near completely ignorant about anything on the quantum level.
Yeah.
So I could just be, more traditionalist in this regard. But yeah, I think we're pretty deterministic.
I think I've got a blended approach where it's like I think that in the moment, like what we do now is governed by whatever state our mental machine is in. The chemical balance, our past experiences, how reactive versus thoughtful we are. But that state can be changed over a long-term effort of changing your thought patterns, of changing your stressors, of changing your life to eliminate. Like if you're prone to anger, you can change your life by arranging it such that you are angry less often, if you have that freedom. So it's like, yeah, like whether you're going to flip out and kill somebody in a long line at amusement park, is that's a split second decision that you probably have very little control of, whether you just walk away and laugh or whether you beat the guy up but like if you're the type of person that would beat someone up for doing something to you in an amusement line, you can probably change that proclivity with a lot of thought, therapy, perhaps medication. So like on the long term life we have control over, but in the day-to-day short term we're very reactive and very deterministic.
I probably need to like find a blunt or something to ask this question, but what do you think about the idea that all of the changes you would make are simply spurred by the reactions, the physical reactions to the events that you had to experience because of your deterministic nature, and therefore it's all deterministic?
So that's the thing is like that goes back to like consciousness being an emergent quality. It's not like consciousness isn't like a property of the brain chemistry. It's an emergent property of it. So there is like some kind of governing force, our consciousness above the animal meat part of it. And I do think that is where you can make some headway, because it's not like an positronic brain, for example, like where's Data's ability to laugh? Is it in a single? No, it's in this network that probably changes and meshes all the time. You can remove parts of it and still the system's resilient enough. And I think that's kind of how I see the free will versus determinism interface going.
Gotcha.
But yeah, let's find a blunt and fire. Let's just change this podcast into the two guys that don't know what they're talking about consciousness podcast.
I'm down.
It's essentially like Joe Rogan, right? Like we just restarting Joe Rogan's podcast 10 years ago.
Right, exactly. I need to find some MDMA. Okay, let's move on to Dolores explaining her escape from Westworld to Bernard as they tour the sanctuary. We think this is 3 months ago, but there's a wrinkle here. Portions of this scene are letterboxed, which, if you're familiar with Westworld, you know that means someone is aware that they're in a simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And Bernard, I think, in this scene even says, this isn't real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also something about a hint for like this being simulated. Did you have a problem with the fact that Charlotte shows up to William and it's like high fucking noon, and by the time he gets cleaned up, it's like dark? Is that a clue that does she hanging around literally all day waiting for him to get his shit together? I mean, maybe it takes a guy that's in that
Yeah.
state that long, but like what he did is he didn't clean up anything. He got dressed, he shaved himself, and he walked outside.
Hmm.
I just think that that's another clue that we are looking at um, a gap between our perception of what's happening and what's actually happening.
Gotcha. Could certainly be. All right, after that, Bernard and Stubbs are staying in a hotel, and Stubbs is pounding beers as they test Bernard's new pause button and discuss Dolores' plans for replacing Liam with a host. Uh, Maybe this is a good place to talk about divergences.
I agree. There's this theory that I see referred to as like Bernard's glitch in the matrix kind of theory, where throughout the season we have seen things from different perspectives and subtle shifts in it. And you actually called one out in the first episode, and I dismissed it as kind of like it was when Bernard goes to tend to this calf. We
Yeah.
see that it's got barbed wire wrapped around an otherwise functional leg, but when the camera reverses, Bernard says the leg is broken. And you pointed
Yeah.
out, and I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe it got broke in, once it got wrapped around with barbed wire. But then people been noticing more and more of these. Like there's one in this scene. You see the two rockets descend, and then the one rocket going up, which some people think is a divergence. I think that's a little weak. But as
I
he
do too, yeah.
continues to walk past that dry pool, there's a family in the background, and a woman is like folding up this rainbow colored towel. And as he walks past them, you see them again, and she's folding a very dark green colored towel.
Hmm.
And when these things happen, they're most often accompanied by like Bernard getting a frown on his face. Another example from the first episode
Yeah.
is him walking past these men as he's going into one of his geodesic apartments. And it looks like they're very angry and they're ready to fight. And then as he walks past them and the camera shifts to see in the front side of them, they're now like, singing songs around the fire.
Hmm.
And this is like, again, I mean, this isn't like mind blowing to me because for the last 2 weeks, I've been saying I think they're playing with, instead of timelines, simulation lines. But this is
Yeah.
it. This is the definitive proof. Yes or no?
I mean, well, it's certainly the quintessential glitch in the Matrix, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that if, the only way it could be more so is if he was experiencing deja vu. But like,
Yeah.
uh, every time he frowns now, I'm sort of looking for the glitch. And he does it all the time, and I don't think it's always
Right.
representative of
Sometimes it's just acting.
in the simulation.
Yeah.
Right, sometimes it is, but I'm on the lookout now
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that there was a lot of that stuff, if you remember, in season 2 around Dolores and Bernard
Mm-hmm.
and the killing of the humans. Like there was a scene where they were all lined up, and you had
Right.
the milk guy jump in front and like sacrifice himself.
Right.
And there were inconsistencies every time they showed that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that turned out to be defragmented memories or sorry, de-addressed memories, placing us in different times.
Yeah.
This time it could certainly be placing us in different levels of simulation.
There's also two other things I wanted to point out. I've had this theory. I don't know. Maybe I was one of the first ones to propound it, but that we're going to understand that Bernard. We came into this series. I think we even mentioned this in the preseason that like we're rooting for Bernard. We're rooting against Dolores. Dolores is the bad guy. I think this scene also kind of directly addresses that role switch between Bernard and Dolores, because Dolores last season learned that control gives you power and strength, but it comes at a great cost. And she learned that when Teddy killed himself rather than to continue being the monster that she had created. Whereas Bernard is very much season 2 Dolores, going reprogramming host willy-nilly, building off switches, testing them on them like they're some kind of fucking animal. The host is aware of it and complaining and saying this ain't cool the whole time. I think that's showing us that they have essentially switched places. That Dolores went through in the exodus of Westworld, a process that allowed her to have a much greater understanding of the world and control systems. That Bernard has still just a very, he's in his infancy understanding, and I think that's going to cause a lot of grief by the end of the series. The other
Yeah, and you can
thing,
see sort of Dolores' reaction to that when her and Stubbs are fighting, and Stubbs is like, "Actually, I can't not do this because Bernard programmed me to."
right?
And she gives like a look of,
Hmm.
that's bad.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the other reason. Oh, maybe that explains why she's using herself, because she's
Hmm.
realized it's immoral to impress someone else into your service.
I certainly think so. Yeah, I'm coming around actually on Dolores maybe not being quite the villain that I thought she was
Mm,
um, at the end of last season, because yeah, she does have that change of heart, and I think her like that reveal of it being all Dolores is all the way down
hmm.
is kind of the thing that cements it to me. She's unwilling to enslave her own people here
Right,
in order to achieve her ends anymore.
right. Um, the other thing I wanted to point out, and this is just a nerd thing, but the ass landing rockets. Another thing that like the Boston Dynamics robot kind of demonstration in episode 2, like
Yeah.
if you've seen a video of that actually happening, it's so fucking wild, and so the future is now that like it's kind of like real life has spoiled this moment in the show.
Yeah,
We don't have flying
absolutely.
cars, but not even the wildest Flash Gordon future imagination did we see like a skyscraper style descent with a rocket. I thought it was just so cool.
I will say it does seem routine, like that
Hmm.
scene where Bernard's walking by and just sort of watches two rocket land side by side, essentially, right?
Yeah,
Well, what are they, like half a mile apart, maybe?
yeah. It's like a
Um,
like an airport.
and then another one takes off right afterward. You
Hmm.
you can call it a divergence if you want. I
Right.
tend to call it like progress,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
technological progress, because we don't
yeah.
have to. It almost seems like these are trains leaving the station, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
17 of them can leave at the same time in close proximity, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, it reminded me of like when I used to work at FedEx at night and the planes were coming in and you could see like the 17 sets of lights like just like maybe a mile apart just stretching infinitely into the distance and just like yeah, between now and the next 45 minutes like 90 planes are going to land here, and it reminded me
Right.
a lot of
Imagine if
that.
the Wright brothers had tried that, right? They're trying to
Yeah.
land 15 of their fucking
First they'd have to get
cobbled
15 of
together.
them. I don't it took how
Uh,
many years did it take to build the first one, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
quite a few.
Progress,
Yep. All right. Let's progress to the next scene. Dolores
please.
buys Caleb a new suit to fit in on their mission. First, because this is going to be, I'm sure, a discussion. First, I
Mhm.
want to say, speaking of technology, this way you try on clothes in the future is amazing, and actually something that we could almost certainly do right now. And I don't know why the online clothing companies haven't done this.
You know what's cool is I tried an online glasses site and they have this where you can take
Okay.
not in real time, but you can take a selfie and line up by the pupils and try all the different designs and see what it looks like on your face.
Why
But
not real time though? Like
I,
we have all these Snapchat filters, and like
it's
you can
coming
turn
for
yourself
sure.
into a fucking dog live on
Hmm.
stream and have a
Hmm.
tongue wagging out of your mouth. You can't put a suit on your body? Come on.
Yeah, or like yeah, I think this is probably stuff that's in the lab and we will see in high-end clothiers, or how do you pronounce that? Clothiers. That's something that'll
Right.
be coming in the next like 5 or 10 years,
I
if not
certainly
sooner.
hope so.
If not sooner, like hell, if you told me you saw this on EC, like the E3 show trade show, I guess not this year because it was canceled, but like
Yeah.
next year, even last year, I'd be like, oh yeah, that fucking, it's totally believable. Before we dive into the next mind blowing blunt topic that we're gonna have to talk about, what did you think? This Dolores explaining the Caleb that rich people are tribal. They use plumage to identify themselves, which makes them easy to fool. I don't feel like that is the case, because I feel like wealthy, or I'm not going to say wealthy. I'm going to say that people of class and privilege are very good at ferreting out people that aren't.
Oh yeah.
And because like I'm in a fairly poor neighborhood. It's a bit that's bumped up right next to a very wealthy neighborhood in Cincinnati. And boy, are those people really good at drilling down to what street do you live on? Where did you go to high school? What did you, and like I've also been in other things where like I've been able to hobnob with people and they're just like able to, yeah, you can wear the right clothes and maybe have the attitude, but you have to have a pretty fucking convincing backstory to like fucking talented Mr. Ripley them long term, because
Yeah.
they just know what schools you went to, where you grew up. subtle things about your accent, the way you view, like they're very good at determining, and sorting people by that. So I don't know if that'll eventually blow up and bite Dolores in the ass, or if it's just a conceit that the showrunners have and they're going to go with it. But
Yeah, and every time Dolores makes some broad sweeping statement about humanity, I sort of cock my head to the side and go, A, how would you know? But
right,
also B, is that actually accurate? I'm not
right,
sure.
right.
I think me and Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy maybe differ in opinion on humanity from time to time,
Yeah,
which is
it
fine.
depends on what segment of humanity you're looking at. Do you find
Right.
the worst, most blighted part in a city and say like, "Oh, I understand what this is like," or do you go into the worst backwoods meth cooking trailer park and be like, "Oh, I know what this society looks like," or
Yeah.
shall we talk about this Friston custom
Yeah. So that's
clothier?
the name of this shop.
Yeah. What do you know about Carl J. Friston?
Well, until yesterday, I knew nothing about Carl J. Friston.
And
Today,
again,
I feel like I know everything about Carl J. Friston.
And again, credit to Kim Renfro over on Insider because her article is what led me to read the Wired profile on Carl Friston, and it's titled "The Genius Neuroscientist Who Might Hold the Key to True AI," which I'll link in the show notes. I read this thing a couple of
Yeah.
times, and it's a very deep, hard to understand concept. In fact, a lot of the article is devoted to explaining how many, many smart people think this is a very difficult to understand concept. How do you want to approach this? Because I think
From a place of pure ignorance, because
right,
somehow I got through this article thinking it wasn't a super complicated process
yeah,
or concept, rather.
hmm,
And that makes me think that I'm fooling myself
okay,
when many,
um,
many smart people have trouble with it. And I seemingly did not.
yeah. We had a little conversation before the podcast, and I worry that like I understand it well enough to kind of understand it, but not well enough to explain it.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm gonna try because I do think that there's several places where this article and this free energy principle interface with the show, and I think that this is being a big influence on Nolan and Joy. So, Carl Frist is a guy who came up with the free energy principle concept. He's a psychologist. But he's also like grounded in math, and the last 10 years or so, he's been spending a lot of time on the concept of AI. How does the free energy principle, what is it? Describe it.
So, as I understand it, the big caveat, big asterisk here, the free energy principle is the idea that your body or your mind and your body, everything you are as a human, is trying to figure out sort of is a predictive machine about the sensory data it's getting
Mm-hmm.
from the world. And so, like, the free energy principle says that the free energy is basically the difference between the expectations that you have and the reality, or I guess the state of the world.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work just on the human mind. Like you can explain single cellular life and how it behaves because they all have inputs, and it's all it explains like the world or the universe works on the second law of thermodynamics, which means that things tend towards decay and lower energy states, but living beings are the one kind of like exception. They are the things that are out of chaos organizing order, right? So like oh man, where do we go from here? One of the things I wonder is why they use the term free energy, because that doesn't seem like it has any application to the free energy concept of free energy is the gap between your expectations of what you're going to get and what your sensory is telling. One example is if you are believing that your left index finger is touching your nose, but your eyes and your body's nervous system tells you that your hand is hanging at the side, then that's a problem, or that's an example of free energy. And there's a way to resolve that free energy, which is to bring your hand up and touch the nose, or you can. So there's two ways to do it. You can either change your prediction, which is like, oh, I guess my arm's just dangling there, or you
Yeah.
can act on the world to bring it in line with your predictions. And those two
And
things are
that's to me where it gets super interesting, and where I start to see the parallels between the free energy principle and what they're doing in the show.
Right, right.
Um,
But they say that this applies to AI because, like, Friston believes that the reason that we sample the world, the reason we look around and we hear things and touch things, is to ensure our predictions become this self-fulfilling prophecy. So that when we think, oh, if I, go to sleep, I don't know, that's a bad example, but like, when we're trying to contemplate and plan an action, to the extent that we fail, we try to either resolve, change our expectations, or we act on the world to bring us to a state of success. And this applies to AI because and one of the ways you can organize a self-learning AI is have this reward and reinforcement system where you have to tell the AI, okay, here's the basic rules about your environment. Here's the ways you can interact with it. And if you do these things, then you get rewarded. And if you do these things, you, I guess, get punished, whatever that means to an AI. And that's had some success. But in late years, they've been trying this free energy model where they don't do that. They just give this AI an awareness of senses that it has, and then it just goes and explores the environment in a free in a free fashion, and uses the gap between what it expected to happen and what its sensors tell it to essentially refine its systems. And these things are both more robust and more precise than the equivalent reward and reinforcement systems that have come before.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I'm not totally sure, absent some kind of goal, which is, I was reading this book, Intelligence, I think it's Intelligence 3.0, and one of the sort of key cornerstones of an intelligence period is that it has some kind of goal, and that goal is not necessarily given to it from an outside entity. It could be its own goal, but the free energy principle doesn't seem to address that part of it to me. I guess you could say that the goal is to match the state of its expectations with the state of reality. But once it does that, once it's able to do that, where does it go from there? What is its goal? And I guess, like, if I'm looking at this as a person, I do have some fundamental built-in goals, right? I mean, the idea of all life is sort of to reproduce, right?
Right.
To further its own existence, to survive.
Which I'll note that you're failing to do so. So
I am. Yeah, I'll probably fail to do so my entire life if it's up to me.
But I think that, like, because you're a much more complex system, but I still think that you could extract it that, like, you live your life until life surprises you, and then you either deal with that surprise or you enact in ways to reduce the surprise, right?
Yeah.
Like you're like whatever that goal is.
So it's an emergent goal based on input data.
Because so there's a lot of interesting, like, if you look at the single-celled life, like, Frisian's talking about in this article about how single cells have membranes as a way to deal with this free energy, because things from the outside world, you get too much sodium in your ion channels and your metabolism breaks down. So it builds a membrane to shield itself from the outside world, so its internal processes can go the way it wants them to, it expects them to, and it only allows things in and out of that boundary selectively. And he says you can apply that to, like, what we see happening in life on social media, where people deal, like, if you're a conservative person or a liberal person and you meet someone from across the aisle, quote unquote, that usually leads, when you start having a conversation, to, like, cognitive dissonance, because they're telling you things that you don't think about and you don't agree with, and it's unpleasant. So we build membranes around ourselves, and then we form membranes and colonies of people of like minds, so that we reduce our level of surprise. And, like, the balkanization of, like, social media and our own communities are an outplaying of this a free energy principle, which I thought was interesting.
Okay, so that is super interesting, and let's take that in the direction of the show.
Yes.
Because I think there is a, like, one-to-one correlation here with Rehoboam, because if you look at that, like, specifically your example of how people change the outside state of the world, right? They put a bubble around their social media interactions, or even their personal societal interactions, in order to kind of bring the world into a state that they recognize as existing. That is kind of what Rehoboam is doing, in a way. Like, it has a reading on humanity, right? That it is trying to enact both, it's trying to line its own internal state up with the existing world. But we also see that in many cases it influences, in Caleb's case, it's influencing him to be the kind of person that it thinks that he's supposed to be. and thereby changing the state of the real world to better match its own internal expectation of the world.
And it also ties it,
and that's super
and
fascinating.
also ties into like what we see in the intro, where we see a single cell begin to divide and differentiate, because the same math that shows like how like a stem cell it eventually differentiates and decides to become a tooth cell or a skin cell or a colon cell is the same math that governs these like online communities forming membranes around themselves and differentiate and getting more extreme and more specialized. The other thing I thought was really interesting is that this guy started off as a psychologist trying to figure out how to treat schizophrenia. And a lot of these things came out of that. And there's a lot of mental illness, obviously, in Westworld. And he thinks that he's got this unified theory of mental illness, which is mental illness is when our system of our ability to make inferences and predict them and adjust our behavior breaks down, and we're no longer able to navigate this free energy. When our brain assigns too much or too little weight on evidence that comes pouring in from our senses, you get into trouble. Like, a person with schizophrenia might not be able to update their model of the world to account for accurate information that's coming from their eyes and ears. And he thinks that most psychiatric conditions are broken belief and false inferences, which manifest in hallucinations and delusions. And I mean, you see that all over the place. You see that with Hale going on now. Like, she is seeing, or Dolores as Hale, she's seeing Hale in the mirror, and the difference between what she's expecting to see and what she's actually seeing, that surprise, she can't bridge that gap, and it's leading into objectively crazy behaviors: self-harm, mutilation, strangling people randomly in parks.
Yeah. And obviously William's experiencing much the same thing with his own expectation of being a human being,
right,
and perhaps his reality of being a robot.
And he no longer feels that he can get to the bottom of the truth, and it can no longer trust his sensory perceptions, which is why he is descending into this mental illness. Like I said, I don't know that we've done it exactly justice, but it is a fascinating concept. In one paragraph, I want to rip right from the article. Some scientists believe the free energy principle is evolving into a real-life version of Isaac Asimov's psychohistory. Psychohistory is a fictional system in his Foundation and Empire series that reduces all of psychology, history, and physics down to statistical science able to predict and shape future events down to the smallest detail. And there you got Robo Hobo. So I encourage everybody, if you like to have a deep think and you want to see kind of like, these are several concepts, like 3 or 4 different concepts that directly tie into season 2 and 3 of Westworld. You really should take, and it's a long article. It's a good half hour to plow through it and then to actually absorb it even more, especially if you go on a Wikipedia deep dive into the free energy principle. But yeah, I'm going to link that into show notes. And if you want to get into the bleeding crazy edge of theory crafting, I think it's going to be required reading.
Yeah,
all agree. That just from a sign that looks like a bow tie on the back wall of a.
And we were sort of talking about this before the podcast. I think it's super important that they throw things like that in there for people to catch. Because, like I said, I didn't know who the hell Friston was yesterday, and I know I feel like today I have a much better understanding of what's going on in the show simply from that sign that they threw in and the investigative work that people have done on the internet. So I feel like I would be more lost without that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of like, I guess that's the kind of thing I like in my shows, where they sort of shed a little bit of light, not trying to obfuscate things, but like, look, maybe you're not getting this, so let's throw you a bone here.
One, I think there's 2 valid ways to enjoy a show like this. One is just watch it and let your mind be blown. It's got to let it watch over you and like go. And the other way is to try to figure it out in advance. And I like that they give you these little signposts. It's like, well, if you're the ones that are you're just super impatient or like a super fan, here's something that kind of lays out a way to look at the world that might make some of this stuff make sense. Because it is, if you are trying to figure it out, there's a lot of opacity going on here, and stuff like this this Carl Friston's teachings, I thought were very illuminating.
All right, let's move on to Martin tricking Liam to get into giving up the code to his personal bank account.
Liam's such a fucking lightweight, man.
Liam's such a guy from the newsroom.
Yeah, like, a lightweight. Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, the correct answer to this is like, you're fucking fired. Get the fuck out of here, which probably would have led to his death. But like, how, in what world does just like disrespecting, bullying, and shitting on somebody lead them to just like petulantly sign a blank check?
I guess in the world where you're not the guy, you're the son of the guy.
It's just, I just think that that one of the relentless things in the show is the type of person that goes to Westworld is a dumb, weak, undesirable person, almost without exception. I can't think of a single person
or evil
or
like William.
Yeah, which it's very easy to get good men that are weak and inefficient to do bad things if they suffer from those qualities, and women too. I shouldn't. But yeah, it seems like that's the point, that all these people are just too fucking whatever, stupid, selfish, insecure, credulous. Yeah.
So, question for you: to what end are they trying to get his money?
Oh,
Because
I
it doesn't
think
play out really in this episode, does it?
Yeah, it does. When Dolores says to William, "I've got a moneyed buyer who's ready to step in with money," Dolores is going to end up being the majority shareholder before the season's over, probably before the next 2 episodes is over. So I think that's the thing. It's like it's just a one sentence throwaway, because you forget that when you realize that this was all a sham to get him institutionalized. But I think she lays it around like, oh yeah, we got this big deep pocket investor, and it is Liam's bank account with a Dolores face plastered on front of it.
Nice. Because we do know she's already robbed one billionaire.
Yeah, and the data pad that they show
Liam's
here
cash.
shows that his net worth is something like $360 billion.
Which,
well, if you got a trillionaire, that's still a lot.
Low.
That's a lot of money.
I'm going to say Liam spent a lot of the financial assets of Insight on whatever expensive auction.
It might
hookers.
be enough to buy a controlling share in Delos, especially if there's a fire sale going on, which it seems like there is. And
like I said, she's already stolen a bunch of money from another billionaire, so
right.
Potentially she has much more than $385 billion.
She's working her way up the billionaire chain.
Yeah.
Watch out, Bezos Jr. She's coming for you next.
I was gonna say, yeah, if Bezos doesn't have at least $1 trillion, he's
Would
slacking.
He be dead by then?
Not necessarily.
30. I guess it's only 30, 40 years in the future, but he's old. Yeah. He's like 50. I guess he could be 90.
Oh yeah, no problem in the future.
All right.
The future's the future, man. All right. Dolores attacks a guy from Liam's private equity firm and steals his blood.
Mm-hmm.
We'll figure out what that's about later.
This blood biohash shit seems like such bullshit, but it's just there to get around the fact that the plot requires their biometric thing to be some kind of blood marker and not fingerprints or retina scans or anything else, because the host would be fucked. They can inject shit into their bodies to pass as other people, but they can't match every person in the world's fingerprint, et cetera, et cetera. So it's one of these things where, like teleporters in Star Trek, it doesn't make sense. It probably never will work, but the plot requires it, and I'm going to go along with it.
Yeah, I had a lot of questions. I have another question on how the hell this works. How the hell do you get away with knocking someone out and stealing their blood in a world that has to be just blanketed with cameras? Blanketed. Every square inch of public
especially since
life would be covered.
It wasn't... Well, I mean, they could have solved that by just having her click a garage door opener, because they've also told us that world can be... those cameras can be disabled at any time. But
they don't do that.
More to the point, if it's easy to if that's that easy to jack a rich person's identity, you just got to jab him with a needle in like a crowd or something. You could run to a bank and... I mean, this seems like an identity theft nightmare. There's no secondary check, like, you got the blood. There's not even a photo ID. Like, you don't look anything like this dude, and you've got his blood. What the fuck? But again, some things
when you read the blood marker, a picture doesn't come up of the person, like a digital photo
I scanned
ID.
my season pass at Kings Island, and a photo pops up, and you can transfer $360 billion just because your blood marker is...
It's sloppy.
Yeah, but it's
sloppy.
It's got to be this way for it to work. Because, like I said, otherwise these synthetics would just be fucked. Like, every time they have to identify the fact that they're a human, let alone a particular one, they just fail all the time.
Yep. Okay, let's go to a much better scene. It's Serac waking Maeve up in a restaurant in Singapore, and he explains that because his home of Paris was destroyed as a child, he's been trying to figure out how to protect humanity from itself for his whole life. And to do that, he needs the data from the park, and he needs the key in Dolores' head to get it. He offers to reunite Maeve with her daughter if she gets that for him, and he shows Maeve the sanctuary where Dolores created the other host bodies, and they torture the person who helped Dolores get the new identities, and they find out that someone named the Mortician helped her.
Singapore, more like Singapore, am I right?
You are one my biggest question going into this scene is how the hell did he get Maeve into this restaurant if she was offline?
It's the type of restaurant you can just bring an unconscious
an
woman in and they just assume, oh, you pre-roofied your escort tonight, sir. Very well, very well. I'll show you to our finest rapist table. Yes, right this way. Right this way.
In an episode with a sex auction.
Yeah,
sure,
I guess.
Why not?
Yeah, sure. What is even consent and free will?
But it did make me question whether or not we were sitting in a simulation. And it's funny because Maeve immediately questions it, right? She's like, oh, this is an over-the-top simulation.
Sure. One thing I had in the instant take is whether this nuclear cloud that we see in France was referenced in the preseason trailer. Of course it was. It happened October 9th, 2025. There was a thermonuclear incident in Paris, and looked like a doozy. That was a big fucking mushroom cloud. So big that I'm like, how did this guy survive? You already had radiation trucks on the scene to hurt him up. Did he not see the blinding white flash? Did not a like 100 decibel pressure wave sweep over this? Like, what is it? Was this a simulation?
Him and his brother Jacques, let's call him Jacques, had biked 25 miles outside of the city, and they happened to be behind a mountain when it happened, so
or like in 2025 lead line clothes is just a fashion.
Oh yeah, lead line school uniforms, right?
Yeah. It's that's how you're going to tell a poor person from a rich person, like, how heavy are your clothes? Do your clothes weigh 100 pounds? They're very good at that plumage
detection.
It's the
free energy between the weight of your clothed body and the weight of your nude body.
I like this scene. I'm a big Maeve fan, but I wish Maeve would ask the question I'm screaming, which is, how can you get me to robot heaven? Like, having an encryption code to it's one thing. You don't even know where it's at. Number two, once I'm in there, it's kind of like Cypher with fucking Agent Smith when he's saying, oh, ignorance is bliss, put me back to Matrix, eat steak, blah, blah, blah. Why doesn't Agent Smith just snap your neck and throw you in a biomass reclamation pod? Why would they re-entomb you into the Matrix and change? Like, doesn't it ever occur to you that the unthinking AI creature will just, like, fuck you over as soon as you agree to it?
I mean, it certainly should.
And I think that Maeve realizes this, because if she didn't, the way he treats Zhang in the next scene where it's like, hey, buddy, if you tell me what you want to know, your family's going to be fine, and imply you're going to get out of here, and as soon as I get what I want, bam, between the eyes. She's not stupid. She's got to be seeing that.
I mean, she's absolutely not stupid. She's perhaps the smartest person in the world.
So maybe she's actually smart. Maybe she's actually smart by not belaboring. Like, she knows this is a bunch of bullshit. So why ask about details?
I assume that's what's going through her head.
Interesting. The other thing is why this feels all unreal, other than the fact that she has magic powers in the real world, is that she just takes the job and walks off. Mm-hmm. Like, no, you're not going to get any help. Do you have money? Did he give you a bunch of money? Did you have weapons? Allies? You're squared off against 6 other AI beings that have a giant head start, and all you got is your magic powers, which you couldn't possibly have known you would have in the real world. I think this whole thing is simulated.
It's entirely possible. So I guess what is he trying to do here? Is he trying to run a simulation that would tell him, that would have Maeve discover in the simulation what Dolores is up to and where she is and how to defeat her, and then to use that information to do that in the real world? Well,
it also could be like this is just part 3 of the test of whether she can even do it. Like Hobo and Serac is just seeing before, is Maeve capable of doing, from what we know, is she capable of stopping the apocalypse? And they're just putting her through. This is just a giant version of her escaping from Warworld, So far she's failing because we leave her at the end of this episode gutted in a pool of white android milk. But So I'm
But
assuming that we'll see her wake up and like Serac will be like, okay, level 2, time to try again, and then I'll know for sure.
yeah, because the other thing that sort of lends it to potentially being a simulation is you were questioning the instant take, how she would have access to all the electronics around her to sort of malfunction all these things
Mm-hmm.
in a simulation. I mean, we've seen Neo do that, right? Like,
Sure.
it's not that
It's
hard.
literally Neo in the Matrix. And also,
Yeah,
I still don't understand what kills hosts. I don't understand in a million years why a single sword thrust through the gut would kill a host.
it wouldn't. It
So
certainly wouldn't.
what the fuck? But then again, didn't she? Well, she stabbed dude through the heart. Like a sword through the heart is a pretty instantaneous death, the way I understand it.
A lot of blood.
Yeah, once you lose blood pressure, you lose blood pressure loss, whether it's by decapitation, slit in jugulars, complete malfunction of the heart, is you lose consciousness rapidly, like within seconds.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe me, go to an MMA gym and ask one of those gorillas to put you in a fucking blood choke headlock. 3 seconds, you'll be night. And that's all it takes. That's how.
No, I mean, it's why we breathe once every couple of
Yeah.
seconds, right? Like,
Yeah.
our body needs that oxygen going to
Yeah.
the brain, and if it doesn't have it,
Yeah.
brain's done.
Done. Yeah.
So what's your opinion of Serac after having watched this for these first 4 episodes a couple of times now? Because I was very much of the idea that maybe he's not quite the villain that we made him out to be. I'm coming around to the idea that maybe he's a villain, but he's certainly a sympathetic one.
Yeah, he's definitely. I mean,
Or maybe even an unintentional villain.
that's what I'm saying. Like, an instant take, I think I referred to him as like a Magneto type. That like, yeah, he's definitely a villain, and he wants something that makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I understand why he's doing it. And I don't know. Like, there's also like, he might be sympathetic he's sympathetic just from like, well, my world was destroyed as a child, so I want to make sure that happens to no one else. And maybe sympathetic from the ends justify the means. Like, maybe his long-term goal is to give mankind free will, but there's going to be a lot of lives lost along the way to get society to a point where people can have get them evolved to the point where they're comfortable enough that life is not zero sum, nature, bloody and tooth and claw, to where you can, have thoughts and empathy and actually act instead of react. Those, I mean, again, that sounds horrific and it sounds like eugenics and a whole bunch of other shit that I'm not comfortable with, but I can understand how a guy like Serac would get there.
I'm also curious if he's so I've got this pet theory, and it's not my theory, obviously, but that the universe is sort of alive in a similar way to us, and we are sort of the brain of the universe. And I don't want to limit that to like
straight Joe
humanity.
Rogan, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And many respected scientists as well, not a dude who's hitting a blunt 5 seconds from now. But I don't want to limit that scope to humanity, because that's foolish. Like, intelligence on our scale, the scale that we're sort of gearing up into, these societal scales, these planetary scales, perhaps even galactic scales, are sort of the consciousness of the universe as a larger organism. And I think that's interesting in context of Rehoboam, which is sort of harnessing the energy of what I would call like all the individual neurons, which are the human elements, right? The individual humans, into this collective sort of thinking mind. That can both, updates internal state, like we talked about with the field energy or free energy principle, and then also exercise actions within the universe through our physical bodies, through our societal mechanisms, to sort of think about itself, right? And have like a consciousness. Like, I guess where I'm going with this is Westworld going to end up with a consciousness on a greater scale than any species or individual or race or anything like that? Are we going to come together as a society and create an entirely new consciousness that is one like meta level above humanity or host?
I mean, it might be the quarter Robitussin talking, but I think, yeah, you're right on. No, I think that's that's an interesting concept. Like, if we're not the universe's eyes and brain, then what is? What mechanism does the universe have to perceive itself? And, they're like, if there's an emergent system from all of our independent synapses firing together, why can't there be some kind of emergent system from all the mass of humanity together? That's a pretty cool concept. You know, that was the original concept, I think, for the that's also, I
Yeah,
think, the
man.
original concept for
Yeah.
the Matrix, that you were supposed to understand that humanity wasn't a battery, but it was actually like a supercomputer. They're like an organic, like a networked mesh
Hmm.
computer network.
Okay.
And somehow it got turned into power because it's easier to understand or whatever.
Yeah. It was a movie after all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on to William cleaning himself up, and he and Charlotte discuss who might be the mole, which is hilarious because we know who the mole is.
Yeah, and he medium suspects her, which means that he was right all the way.
Yeah.
Many people pointed out the similarities between having the man in black having deluded Dolores shave him in season 1 versus deluded William being shaved by
Yeah.
a woke Dolores in this season. And yeah, that's again, that's the good shit.
It's pretty delicious.
Yeah, that reminds me back in the Breaking Bad days where they would like ape shots from seasons ago to it's just good. Hits just right.
Yeah. All right, then we go on to Dolores and Caleb entering Liam's bank using the stolen blood to empty his bank account.
That is accurate. That's yep.
I don't know, like, how tense were you in this scene? Was this effective on an emotional level?
Not especially, but I guess the tension was: am I going to see Dolores kick a bunch of ass, or is this going to work?
Yeah.
But you know, sometimes
it's so early, like in this rebellion, in this
Mm-hmm.
revolution, that if she were to kick a bunch of ass, I wouldn't believe that she'd be able to withstand the full force of humanity coming down upon her.
And I think that's why even Dolores is very confident about, well, I'll just kill everybody. When she was looking around and seeing all the guys with rifles, she was clearly worried. So I think,
Right.
nah, there's not real tension there, but like you sometimes have to observe the forums, you know. Like you can have a 30 seconds where it's like, I like the money. Okay, here's the money. Okay, I got the money. Like you might as well do it.
So the idea that that you had, that, you know, this private investor was going to be, you know, Dolores herself
Mm-hmm.
through the money they steal from Liam is interesting because it's sort of like this strange twist of fate where William had sold the data to Liam, or well, to Liam's father, I assume,
Mm-hmm.
which then became the money that was used to buy it outright from under him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even just like the indirect, oh, you did this 20 years ago and it came back to haunt you. It's more like, no, these are the actual dollar bills. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is the money we stole from you, and we made using your data, now coming back to buy everything out from under you.
Yeah, it's wild. It reminds me. It's kind of like its own form of time travel. Like it's like Biff taking the sports book back, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost like a paradox. Like had he not done that thing, none of this would ever happen.
Right. All right, Maeve tracks the mortician to her hideout and demands to know what Dolores was doing. Apparently, Dolores asked her to smuggle out bodies, and the Yakuza were helping her. And Maeve makes mortician take her to the Yakuza.
And it's my understanding that like we're not talking about smuggling bodies like the 5 that she had. We're talking about mass production smuggling bodies.
Yeah.
Like when we find out that there's like this distillery is just running full time android milk. They're going to be running a mass operation of moving, and it reminded me a little bit of like the American Gangster. And I've seen this plot before, where I think this is loosely based on reality, where someone figured out you could traffic a lot of heroin by stuffing GIs' bodies coming back from Vietnam, because you know those got just waved through security, and if you had a connection on both sides, you could move unlimited amounts of heroin. With the mortician, it makes me think that the way they're going to schlep these hosts around is through however you move dead bodies. You know, people don't ask too many questions about that kind of stuff. And plus, it would be fucking metal as hell to see like a ton of hosts all over the world like punched their way out of coffins and like morgues and whatnot. Wouldn't that be fucking cool? Start the rebellion, a bunch of naked corpses getting off the tables and running amok.
I mean, it'd be, you know, Westworld 2.0, right?
Mm-hmm.
The massacre that happened there.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting, like, you know, as much as I think the blood marker stuff is dumb, it is cool that they continue to build on that concept of the world where you have a person like the Mortician, which seems like her whole reason to exist is to find ways to save people's blood markers and give them to people so they can, like, this is the late 21st century equivalent of fake IDs.
Yeah.
So having a body shop like hers that's kind of off the black, you know, off the, you know, definitely black market is a cool concept that kind of feeds into that.
It does make you wonder, like, what's the permanence of those identities? Because we also know that the blood markers break down in like 15, 20 minutes.
If they're exposed to oxygen, which doesn't make sense because your blood isn't it saturated with, I guess not. I guess actual blood inside you is not oxygenated.
But at some point, you breathe in the oxygen and it's exposed, right?
I would think so.
So, like, isn't that the whole point of blood? Well, not the whole point of blood, but a big point of the blood is to carry oxygen.
Yeah. I was
to
thinking
the parts
that,
of the body that need it.
If it was exposed to oxygen, it would start to break down and your body runs off oxygen for all of its biological processes. But again...
Right. So how permanent are these identities? Or is it more just a black market of, like, temporary identities? But...
Is it something that you get at birth? Do they inject you with a unique, like, identity marker and it just, like, self-replicates or something? I don't know.
One of a myriad of questions I have about blood markers.
Also, isn't it bad to inject someone's blood into someone else without it being... Is this a... I just thought of this. Is this more proof that Caleb might be a host? Because I thought it's very bad to just inject someone's blood. That is, if you haven't, like, checked blood types and all that kind of stuff, it can make you very, very sick. Maybe it's more quantity than...
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it takes.
Yeah.
But I do know you're right about that. The body does project outside its organisms of all types, including other people's blood.
If my predictive systems are working correctly, I imagine we'll get a few doctors setting us straight, because that's like med school first semester shit, for sure.
All right, let's move on to the Eyes Wide Shut sex auction, where I guess everybody in the show except the William and Charlotte show up here. Bernard grabs Liam and Caleb gives chase with Stubbs running defense on Dolores, and they have a fight. It's a pretty good scene. I'm a fan of Eyes Wide Shut, so I enjoy seeing the references. I think somebody was talking about multiple Kubrick references, like maybe there was a 2001 reference earlier this season.
Could be. But this definitely felt Kubrickian, even in, like, the austere lighting, and
it's also pretentious as fuck. Like, it's only in certain echelons of society where this kind of sex auction goes on. And don't get me wrong, sex auctions, I'm sure, happen constantly in all stratas of society, but this is a particularly pretentious one.
But this is just, like, further outgrowth of, like, you see gross stuff like this at Oscar parties all the time, like, you know, $10,000 ice sculpture with, you know, $50,000 worth of caviar surrounding it, and people just letting it go to waste because who the fuck, you know? It's like it's extravagant and perverse and you know, very secretive and closed off, because it's essentially watching people jerk off, and nobody likes that. So I don't know. And it also lets Dolores deliver the sick line, "Your world's not that different from my world at all."
Mm-hmm. We also get confirmation here that they did tell Liam that Dolores was dead, and True. You know, all his friends know it and everything.
I do think this is the best fight of the episode, though. Like Dolores versus Stubbs. Like I really liked his falcon knee to her, and I actually thought at one point thought
sluggish.
Well, he's got his shoulder still fucked up.
I know, and I'm not gonna I'm not blaming whatever Johnny Hemsworth here, but like
Luke.
If
he's going to be the middle Hemsworth, we got to remember his name, man.
Yeah, Billy Hemsworth, he's fine. I'm not gonna blame him, but like, you know, Stubbs is a big guy, and he's swinging pretty wide here.
Yeah,
and I'm surprised he even lands one of those gargantuan punches.
Let alone his knee. But I thought it's like, if all the fights in the show, hand-to-hand fights, were this good, I wouldn't probably have many complaints.
Yeah.
Stubbs is certainly not dead. Like, I don't know what kills a
No,
host,
no,
but a
no, no.
fall off a balcony on a single floor and a half fall is not going to do it.
Yeah.
It does. It makes you wonder how he gets away, though, because like this happens fairly clandestinely, and people aren't too
Until then.
freaked out because it's happened in the middle of like a digital opium den, so everyone's kind of fucked up and thinking. It's really funny because from these simulation man and his girlfriend, from their perspective, this is just fucked up because this is a person literally returning from the dead, beating the shit out of somebody, and they just assuming it's drug. But like when she throws Stubbs over, you hear a whole room full of people scream. Like, is he just going to pick himself off the ground, to dust himself up, walk up or walk off? What are the cameras going to do? I think I think we're going to have to selectively excuse things that shouldn't be possible in a late 21st century enviurnment, like
Right.
you know,
Like facial
pervasive
recognition.
surveillance and facial recognition and all that stuff. Like, you're just going to have to, sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not, and it's going to be an entire service to the plot.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's talk about genre, because you mentioned people being in drugs, being drugged up here.
Yeah.
Genre seems like it's going to be a thing. You don't mention a specific drug and tell you about its effects unless it's going to come back. And I think maybe in the next time on, I saw something about it. But it kind of reminds me of, speaking of Watchmen, you were talking about it earlier, of the nostalgia trip that Angela goes on.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's going to be anything similar to that, or if it's just going to be more of a feeling and less hallucinatory sort of experience.
It also might be just a nod to the existence of these parks, because it seems like the thing that differentiates him is genre. Like, you got Western World, you got Shogun World, you got Military War World, all those different things. But also, it's the name of the next episode.
Oh, okay. I mean, if it's in the name, then yeah.
I wonder, but that raises more questions than answers, especially since I've seen the next time on, and it's fucking nuts. Did you watch it finally?
I did, yeah.
Didn't it feel like it's like a whole season on? Like, it covers a lot of ground in like 30 seconds, man.
Yeah. And we've seen, from other previews and stuff, like the Man in Black William is going to get some kind of implant. I don't know if he has it already or if he's going to get it later, perhaps in this next episode. And this, because they talk about genre interfacing with, your interface, the implant in your mouth. So we could be in for a real trip next episode.
Oh, yeah. Hold on a sec.
Next up, we get the first part of the Maeve at the hideout of Sato, where she's warned about how insane Sato is, and she kills the guards and enters the facility. This is the gun that bends your wrist scene. Mm-hmm. What'd you think of this?
One does not simply walk into a Yakuza distillery unless you're Maeve, and that's exactly what you do. Did you happen to note the name of the distillery?
I did not write it down, but yes, I read about this.
Yeah, it's Itai Doshin. I probably butchered that, but it's a Buddhist philosophy and terminology, and it means to be in the same mind, even though we are many in body. We all have different. I'm going to read from a website where I got this. We all have different faces, characters, talents. No one is the same. This is the meaning of many in body. When we have the same goal and work together to achieve it, this signifies the same mind. And obviously, you can directly see the parallels between the 5 Doloreses out there kicking ass and scheming and manipulating and trying to achieve one goal. Literally one mind in 5 separate bodies.
And I do wonder how ironic that will seem by the end of this season, if we're going to have some kind of divergence between the 5 Doloreses that are out there.
I think it's almost required, because as we talked about this on Instant Take, the second Dolores put those marbles in a different body and then they separated and started having different experiences, they literally became different people. And I don't know to what extent Dolores understands that's going to happen. Like, I'm hoping that crazy Dolores is her first clue that these are different people with different needs and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's just, there's a lot of existing science fiction dealing with clones and consciousness and bifurcation, and it does seem that you will start to diverge almost from the second that you're split off.
Mm.
So I hope they play with that, because I think that's a really fun and exciting concept. The fact that she'll eventually be a house, but potentially a house divided. You'll have like 3 Doloreses on Team Bernard, 2 Doloreses on Team Dolores, and then one secret Dolores that's actually trying to work directly for, I don't know, Ford.
Sure. Yeah.
There's some
Ford's in there too.
Ford knew it was all going to happen, and he split himself into 5 different marbles, and she's unwittingly played and activated his Voltron contingency, and her eyes are going to glow white, and she'll start speaking like Anthony Hopkins.
Yes. Can't wait.
Mark it on the prediction board.
There are some parallels, I guess, between what's going on with Rehoboam and what's going on with Dolores in this concept of what'd you say? Like Doshin?
Yeah. Doshin.
Yeah, being of one mind in many bodies, because I mean that's essentially like, I talked about the universal brain theory, right? That's essentially what that would be. All of humanity working in concert under the control of this single mind, Rehoboam.
Oh, interesting. You've got 2 equal and opposed armies.
Yeah, and I wonder if they're going to do anything with that. We'll see.
That'd be cool.
All right, William's ready to leave, but first he has one last mirror battle with Emily. And she says she'll be back at some point, I think.
I believe her. I don't think when you're actually hallucinating, you have the choice to choose to leave anything behind, man.
He tries to exert his free will, his will not to see her anymore, but I don't know if that's going to work.
He lost control of his free energy. That's what I'm going to say. Instead of saying someone lost their marbles, which is actually oddly apropos to Westworld, I'm going to say you've lost grip on your free energy, man.
Yeah. Rein that in. All right. All at once, and there's a lot of scenes happening. There's a lot of stuff here, and I'm going to describe it very swiftly. Maeve sees that Musashi is the ringleader and creating host coup. Caleb chases down Liam. Martin holds Bernard at gunpoint. William is committed, and we find out that every single host is Dolores. Holy shit, that's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff. But it's also the natural kind of outgrowth of things we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered most of the multiple Doloreses. I did want to go back and revisit something that I don't think we talked about, which is there's this idea that Dolores said that if we go by what Dolores said, that she didn't smuggle Bernard out of the park so much as she reimagined him on the outside.
Yeah.
I have this theory that Dolores spent like the first week and out of the park. Okay, let me back up. Hosts have a huge computational and memory storage. Like Peter Abernathy was able to hold the entirety of the guest data in his brain. Now, it wasn't good for him, but it just implies that one of those marbles are like way computationally overkill for what they're doing. I wonder if Dolores sat in a lotus pose and meditated for like a solid week and just did nothing but simulate in her own head what would happen and planned out her next moves. And one thing she wanted to do is create a Bernard that would do a particular thing. And I think that particular thing it's doing is like the concept of radar chaff, like when you got a radar guided missile coming out and you dump a bunch of aluminum foil strips in the air and then the thing chases that instead of the aircraft. I wonder if Bernard being this divergence that she can predict and control because she built his mind is running interference with Robo Hobo so she can, it's got more than one divergence to track down and kind of masks what she's doing.
That's the corruption that he's talking about.
Yeah, it's not even corruption. It'd be a corruption that he wouldn't be able to detect.
Yeah,
but I also think it's interesting that if that's true, there's already a divergence because if it's literally simulated, then she should know exactly what Bernard's going to do, and she shouldn't be surprised when he shows up a few minutes or hours or days early, right? So we see that there's already maybe a divergence there, but I think that there was a lot of fuckery that she got up to in between escaping the park and then going and throwing that billionaire into a swimming pool to his death.
Okay, I'm trying to take stock here. Do a little inventory on who has what pearl in their head. Okay, so there are 5 pearls that came out of the park plus the one that was in Hale. So there are 6 total.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is currently in Dolores.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is currently in Hale. One of those is in Martin. One of
Yep.
those is in Bernard.
One of those is in Musashi.
One of those is in Musashi. So that's 5.
There's still one unaccounted for, yeah.
One unaccounted for. What if that Pearl is acting as a scaled down version or a facsimile of like a Rehoboam?
I mean, the one thing that jumps out at me is the shape. Like they're both spheres. One's just a very compact one. Like that's kind of interesting. I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are screaming, "It's Caleb! It's Caleb!" What is your thought?
Right.
What is your thought on Caleb being
Man, I
a
don't
host?
want everybody on this show to be a host.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the opportunities there for saying something about humanity become extraordinarily limited once everyone's a host or everyone's in a simulation.
Yeah, because I think also it destroys a lot of what the symmetry of the story where they're telling that humans are on track. You know, like if he's just a host, all that goes out the window. You know, everything we thought we knew about human society in this future goes out the window.
So I don't like it. I'm not going to say it's not true, though.
But I will be open to some of the things we see Caleb doing is simulated inside Robo Hobo.
Okay.
The other thing is I'm gonna leave open the possibility that maybe Dolores is keeping a marble spare. Maybe, as you say, to simulate, you know, to be an equal and opposite to Robo Hobo. But also, we got to get William in a host body at some point. Seems likely. And I wonder if long term they're planning on, like, you know, they're saving a marble from him, and that explains why Dolores stabs his, you know, gets a DNA sample from him by stabbing him in the neck.
Let me throw something out there. Is it possible that we need to, in the light of the simulation stuff in this season, recontextualize last season's post-credit stinger?
Agreed.
Where William was in a seemingly far-flung future where Westworld is completely run down and he's being tested for fidelity. Do we need to maybe recontextualize that as him being in a simulation and that being present day? Yes,
or another possibility is he's in a mental institution and he's recontextualized that as being in a Delos lab that he can't get out of. You know, because we already see that he can have waking delusions about these hosts coming back and his daughter coming back and thinking he's a host. Yeah. Like it could just be that he is in this sterile lab environment that he can't escape, and his fractured mind puts himself back in the position of Jim Delos.
So what if the Pearl isn't in him? He's in the Pearl.
Fuck you. What if he's keistered the Pearl? He's got 2 equal and opposite brains now at both ends of the body, and
and it's simulating
this show, man, really gets you chasing your tail.
Where's my blunt? All right,
I gotta get another quarter.
I lost track of my blunt.
Before we move on, there's this one big question I had, which is, I mentioned that Dolores, or, you know, whatever we're calling her, says at the beginning that she's got a deep pockets investor. But even then is not enough to get all the shares. They're going to need William to convince the investors. But she has him committed. And all of his shares go to her, but she already said that him and her shares together are not enough to take the company public. So how do they bridge that gap?
She needs to convince more people on the board to side with her.
How does she do that? Because they're all wildly skeptical. Like, I'm going to have a real problem.
Some of them.
She could, but she's only got 1 marble left. I wonder if... So my idea that they're going to copy William seems like it'd be the obvious solution to do. But then how the hell do you copy William, but he's also in a mental institution somewhere?
Well, and also, even if you copy William... Okay, so you're saying copy William, bring him in, convince the other board members. Yeah. He seems to have a lot of sway.
Yeah, because like the money is not the only problem. They also have to... They need the other shareholders, enough of them to get a majority and take it private.
How about this?
Okay.
He's not in a mental institution. He's already running in the simulation. and his body has been disposed of.
That's what I thought.
And they're going to recreate William and bring him into the board.
Who were those goons taking him away? Were they just like Rico dudes that she hired? I guess that would make perfect sense. But why?
Could be. Yeah.
Why have the subterfuge of you're just going to a mental institution? Like, why lie about it? I guess that keep it to make him not question the nature of his reality.
That's what I was wondering. Because like with Delos, it was important that they didn't tell him he was a simulation.
Because like Liam,
host, right?
Dolores still wants to keep him in play for whatever reason. So you tell him he's going to the mental institution, you kill him, put him in a simulation. He doesn't question nature because that perfectly lines up with the Ooh, that sounds pretty good, which probably means it's wrong.
And then he is at the beginning of the maze, right? Because then he's a host essentially in the simulation who doesn't think he's a host.
That doesn't think he's a host.
Thinks he's real.
And the way you figure to climb that ladder is through suffering.
Right. Huh. Okay.
What does that imply? So now let's go back to the post-credit scene from last season. What does that imply that... Because it gives the appearance of being in the far future. Like his simulation might have run for like hundreds or thousands of years and he still hasn't gotten the fact that he's a host. Is that more grist of the humans are incapable of change mill?
I don't know. It's interesting because Delos never did either, right?
Right.
They had to eventually tell him.
Yeah.
And every time, he tried it, it failed.
Yeah. The simulation broke down. Yeah.
I don't know, man.
But I do like the idea that, because like if that literally took place as they described it, it doesn't seem like her buyout plan will work. But of course, she could also just lied to him. She could have told him a bunch of shit. But it seems like the whole season she doesn't have enough to get what she needs, and she has to work and scheme to do that. So I'm taking most of her statements at face value, that they're a true reflection of the reality of the Delos financial situation.
And I actually didn't go back and check this because I just thought of it. Isn't he in the same clothes at the end of this episode as he is in the Stinger from season 2?
No, he's dressed up as the Man in Black. He like stumbles down
really?
the elevator and it's like rubble and dust and his fingers are still blown off. What do we make of that too? Why are they keep hiding his hands? Are they doing like an Expanse style regrowing a hand?
Well, they do one thing at the beginning when he's having his mental break with Emily.
Right.
Where you see that he has kind of a robot hand. But I want to chalk that up to just his mental state. That's just sort of his perception of himself at that point.
But then we see he's either bandaged up or he's got some kind of weird glove on.
Yeah.
There's something significant to that, right?
I mean, the glove could just be, well, I don't want to meet with the board with blown off fingers.
But why is he wearing a mental
bloody
institution?
bandaged hands? Good question. I don't know.
Yeah, they're doing something tricky with that between
be.
the robo hand and the glove, and I wonder maybe that's another signifier, like reality versus simulation too.
Yeah, the glove
theory.
Okay. So yeah, we kind of talked about that whole scene already, where he's haunted by Dolores, who welcomes him to the end of the game, and it seems significant. It seems like this is the idea that the end, the game begins where you end and the game ends where you begin.
Mm-hmm.
All that kind of stuff kind of seems like this
Feels
is just
good, yeah.
the launching pad for the next phase in William's journey.
Does this feel like a final season to you? It's starting to feel like it to me. Like that statement, welcome to the end of the game, the fact that this is a 8-episode season, implying that there's a finite story that they want to tell. Like, I'm not saying that they couldn't come back with other ideas, but like, is it starting to feel like this is a trilogy of seasons?
Maybe.
Yeah, I wonder.
Maybe.
I wonder. Because I know they haven't. I don't think they've made a public statement about it.
And here's the thing, like, maybe because the coronavirus thing we're doing, or something with production, but also you have. So I look at the numbers that this show is getting, and they seem to be dropping off as opposed to growing. Like
less
than
a million people watching it, at least in however HBO calculates that.
Mr. Nielsen with his calculations, but I look at that and I look at the budget and I see, are these things in line here? And I also look at some statements from Joy and Nolan saying that they want to, they don't want to be happy with the state that they're in with the show. They want to up the scale every time. Every season they want to go bigger and grander
Yeah.
with both their ideas and the depictions of those ideas. And I
Yeah.
think at some point you have to look at the ratings shrinking, the budget growing, and say,
Right.
where do those things shake out? And maybe they shake out at the end of the season.
Yeah, because where do you go once you go to the outside world? Like, I mean, I could
It
see like
does feel,
I could see an anthology series where it's just like Westworld stories, where it's just like tales of the
yeah,
resistance or what, like, like take the story further in different directions. But yeah, like you'd have to go forward 1,000 years before it's like, oh, what are the robots doing in the solar system? Or, you can't get much bigger
right,
than
right.
the real world, at least in this near future.
It does feel to me like we have a lot still left to do in 4 episodes, though.
Yeah.
If we're talking about the end of a series that wants to say something big about life and intelligence and humanity, and I just don't see us getting there in 4 episodes.
Yeah. But they
So
could
my
cover a lot of
guess is we're going
ground.
to do another season, but maybe not.
I remember there's a lot of conversation before the penultimate episode of season 1 is like, Jesus Christ, how can they possibly wrap this thing up? It seems like it just keeps expanding, and they had a few twists and a few mind blowns, and then
Yeah.
there's your season 1. So, and again, I didn't say for nothing that next week's trailer looks like it's like 4 episodes worth of shit.
Uh huh.
So they
Fair.
might just move real fast. Okay, it's time to talk feedback. You can send feedback into us at westworld@baldmove.com, and a lot of people took advantage of that. The first up is Rachel. She asked an important terminology question for us. Should we call the Dolores clones Dolori or DeLoreans?
I like DeLoreans.
DeLorean sounds good, and it really, really rolls off the tongue, too. I
Yeah.
guess
Sounds like a
Delori,
Disney Plus series.
the Dolores. Mandalorians.
Yeah.
She says also I vote that we call the white goo host soup. Host, I
Okay.
mean, yeah, host soup. Yeah. I'm
I've never
I'm
had
fine
to
with
come up with a
that.
name for it.
We'll see if it sticks like Robo Hobo. And do we know why Bernard thought Dolores took over Liam's body? Maybe that's what she did in a prior simulation, and it's true that Serac is just running it through till he can find a successful path, which means Maeve's death also possibly took place in a prior simulation, and she's back in a robot hell of reliving the same thing over and over again. Not sure what that means for humans like Caleb, though. I think that... Well, first of all, do you have any ideas? Because I got some thoughts.
It's because Bernard's an idiot. It's because Bernard sees the most obvious, blunt path toward the goal and assumes that Dolores is going to take it, and Dolores is smarter than that.
Also, I think that I don't know if we talked about this. Well, yeah, I think Dolores' fundamental goal has changed slightly. I think that she came out into the real world thinking that every human is like the guests in Westworld, and what she's found out is that much like in Westworld, there's a very small amount of people that are like playing the game to its fullest capability, and there's teeming billions of people who are essentially NPCs in their plots.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a sympathy and empathy for those people. So her goal is no longer to burn down the system, but to find some way to unify the masses under control, whether they be robot kind or whether they be human kind.
I feel like she should have known this already. I remember an interaction with her.
How could she possibly?
Down by the river where she was painting it, painting the countryside, and like a family and their young boy come up to her, and they're very nice to her, and it's a wonderful interaction, and she completely ignores that in the scope of what humanity is.
But she sees William, who she thought was a pure, innocent, justice-driven person too. She saw how cruel that he eventually became. So like maybe her concept is like, oh yeah, maybe they start, or in certain circumstances they're okay, but when you get down to who they really are, they're vicious cutthroats. I could see that. Because yeah, I guess she probably had pleasant experiences with some of the guests, but she also had very pleasant experiences with William, and we saw how that turned out.
True.
Travis says, the scene last night where Serac talked about the apparent nuclear destruction of Paris lost a lot of impact for me because I immediately started questioning its reality. Is he lying? Did it happen in a simulation? Is it an implanted memory? That's the problem with the show that's taught us to question its reality so frequently. It loses a lot of emotional impact. I agree.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I obviously agree. Like, this is a very, very fine line that they tread, and they transgress that line frequently. To the extent that a lot, like Alan Sepinwall, my favorite TV critic, noped out on the show at the season because he's just like, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, this is a style of television. It's a much more cerebral style.
Yeah.
A lot of emotionally resonant
It's very
filling.
like what you're supposed to really, I think, get sucked into is the allegory. Like these systems, how do they fit into your life? Where do you disagree? Where do you agree? Are we headed towards that more than like, oh my God, Caleb and Dolores? I mean, they're archetypes. You know, like we've literally gotten 15 minutes of probably character development from Caleb this entire season. Now, it's good stuff because Aaron Paul is really good and he's inherently relatable and he's kind of like very good at playing that kind, emotionally conflicted and tormented and he's got those soulful eyes and they do a lot of work just like Evan Rachel Wood in the first season. But it's not about feeling for the characters so much as like the situation and relating to the situation.
I really wish they could do both.
Agreed.
I think, and this is the caveat that I have to give with a show like Westworld. Like, yes, there are some truly inspired concepts and some inspired storytelling in a lot of places, but it's always tinged with the idea that you're not really going to connect with any of these characters on an emotional level.
Yeah.
Except with rare occasion. Like every once in a while when they get to like the heart of Dolores's reasons for doing what she's doing, there's an emotional core there, but it's not on display very often in this show, and I think that is the largest failing of this show, and it's not enough to drag down the whole show,
but
it is enough for me to say this isn't the best show ever created, even though some of the concepts they're dealing with are right up there.
Sure. And I have sympathy for him because we just talked. It could be that this framework that they're creating only works if the hosts have very little human interaction. Like if there were more sympathetic human characters in season 1, then you couldn't have Dolores be in this false dichotomy between, humans are evil and all that. Like it would reduce a lot of that kind of melodrama, which might have been good. I don't know. But I do think they're trying to say something, and it's something very allegorical. And sometimes you have to sacrifice realism and, character growth to make that allegorical point. And will it be worth it in the end? I don't know. It just depends on how well the show sticks to landing, if it is coming in for a landing, et cetera, et cetera.
I think it's also the way the story is told too, because there are definitely moments of character growth. We talked about this episode how Dolores has changed over the course of a couple of seasons, right?
Oh yeah.
Not even on a consciousness level, but on an emotional level, and I think those things tend to get lost in some of the trickier ways that they're telling this story, and some of the bigger concepts. So, like,
I still think that people aren't really processing what a big moment it was for Teddy to kill himself. Like, I think that's where she went from a heel face turn, is that moment. She realized, oh, this path, that's I think that's also, it's not about her not trusting other robots. It's just her feeling that it's immoral to have any other robot make, like compel or force them to be in her army, even though she could easily do that. Those are lessons that I don't think Maeve has quite understood exactly, and certainly not Bernard. John wants to disagree with one of our takes in the Instant Talk podcast. It says, one of the reasons I thought Hale was Dolores was because of how delicately and sweetly she was treating Hale in that scene. I mentioned on Instant Talk that, like, I don't understand the concept of, like, comforting yourself in that way. And he says, I don't think that's
spooning scene. Right?
Yeah, he goes, I don't think it's odd at all to spoon yourself to comfort yourself. It's actually sweet. If you could take a new version of yourself, almost like a baby, and comfort them knowing them as well as you know yourself, wouldn't you? It's like extracting your inner child from your mind and giving them a hug. For some reason, this is the new Charlotte Hale body, not the one that escaped Westworld. So Dolores Prime in Dolores' body knows what this feels like, waking up in the wrong body. I will point out, John, the one thing I've realized in the last few years is I'm kind of fucked up. And that, like, I am very ruthless with my inner child and my inner self. And when I don't live up to my own expectations, I am very vicious. I do not. And I think that it's healthier to spoon and comfort. And, hey, buddy, what's wrong? Don't you understand this? It's okay. We'll get through it. And I'm working on that. But I think I might have just shown my psychological ass in not getting that. Because when I read your email, I was like, yeah, of course, this is, like, weird in that it's happening externally, but that's how all, like, psychologists say you should kind of parent yourself when you are failing or you're getting through disappointment or something like that. But it's not the way I was raised.
Makes sense. Yeah, same here.
John continues, I also don't think it's weird to be disoriented and not feel quite like yourself when you wake up in a body that isn't yours and see yourself sitting across from you in a separate body. I assume that's a large part of the point of episode 3, now that it's confirmed that she and everyone else is Dolores. I mean, yes, part of the dialogue in those scenes is the show being deliberately obfuscatory, but I also think it's true that this is just damn disorienting. We have never seen a host in the wrong body before. The brief scene of Dolores as Hale at the end of season 2. We don't know what it's like to wake up and what adjustments are required or how long it takes you to feel like yourself. Sometimes it takes all day, a cup of coffee, and strangling a pedophile to death to truly wake yourself up.
I know that always helps me.
Yeah, I also think that's probably true and right on. I do wonder, to throw another monkey wrench, is like, what if it's there's an extreme difference. Like, so John's saying that the reason that Dolores is relatively together this episode is that she's had time to adjust. I also wonder if I wonder if Dolores actually, in those scenes where Dolores was, well, there's not enough time for that to happen. Either it's a simulation, because my thought is like, what if she actually started off with 5 allies, realized that this wasn't working and is not moral to ask people to be in the situation, and then just copied herself 5 times. But I don't think the timeline matches up. It could be a simulated, like if she's doing that lotus pose meditation, simulating things 20 times the speed of reality to figure out her best way to act.
Yeah.
I also think that neatly explains why she's navigating this world very, very cleanly and elegantly in a way that Bernard's not. Like I mentioned in Instant Take podcast that 90 days outside the Westworld, Dolores has 5 allies, $500 billion, and has the reins of one of the world's largest, richest companies in her grasp, and she's already got the supply line to make a whole army of robots. And Bernard's made an off button for his buddy that's got a busted arm that just wants to kill himself. That's where they're at 90 days. Bernard learned about animal husbandry while she was taking over the world.
I think that's just white privilege. Like,
yeah, if you could pick a sleeve to be in to take over the world, an attractive blonde female, woman that can wrap men around is probably better than a Jeffrey Wright, if we want to bring that element into it.
Yeah, you certainly could.
All right. Justin writes in, this will probably tie for the amount of responses you got for Jawadi's Raj mix of 7 Nation Army, but I wanted to speak briefly on the choice to adapt Wicked Games by The Weeknd for the auction scene in this week's episode. Actually, no, I don't think we got a lot. I think it's because I'm kind of a Weeknd fan, and I didn't immediately recognize this.
I never heard the song, but I listened to it, and now I'm a Weeknd fan.
I guess it was one of the singles, but it was back in 2012, and I wasn't familiar with it, so I appreciate you filling in the gaps here. He says Wicked Games was on The Weeknd's first self-release mixtape, House of Balloons, and launched in March of 2011. It was released as a single, but not until his 3 mixtapes were released together a year later as Trilogy. In many respects, it's typical Weeknd, drugged out, smoky, and longing, all those feelings from a young Abe Tesfaye, I guess, on the brink of fame. Pretty much at the same time, we see him in Uncut Gems, which was set in 2012. Oh, okay, they're making an Uncut Gems reference, which I have not seen yet. A small sample of the lines that fit with the Mother of Exiles go like this. Bring your love, baby, I could bring my shame. Bring the drugs, baby, I can bring my pain. And he goes on and on throughout the song, listing what he will trade for sex with a woman. He'll trade fame, drink, and of course cash. He's even emptied out his cards too. According to Abel, whether he's trading sex for money or sex for love or drugs or loneliness, it's all a transaction, which, yeah, like as he goes on to point in, is what Liam's friend Roderick says, all sex is commerce, even if you don't know, you're just being billed indirectly.
Mm-hmm. Which parallels, what Maeve said in the Mariposa last 2 seasons ago.
Yeah. We said to Teddy, he's like, I don't know, I prefer to win my affections rather pay for them. She's like, you're always paying, darling, just our prices are posted on the wall.
Right.
So another thing I'm not sure I exactly agree with Westworld, but let's move on. But I do appreciate that, Justin. Let's move on to Alexander. Dolores isn't Dolores, or perhaps one is, but rather it's Ford. This was his end game. Your oldest friend isn't Dolores, it's Ford. Is Ford Williams' oldest friend? It seems like they've always had an antagonistic relationship. Yeah.
We've only really seen them interact as old men, haven't we? Like, what was young William's interaction with Ford?
I mean, he's skeptical of the whole concept until he got woke and turned into the Man in Black, and then he's like fucking ambitious and wanting to take it all over and wanting to hijack Ford's yeah, like they were wanting to build that Sector 16 project, which Ford was opposed to.
Yeah,
so
I don't think they've ever been friends.
No, I mean, it could be ironic because I think that they've referred to themselves like that before. But I mean, if you're asking me, do I think Anthony Hopkins is somewhere in this season, like in some kind of Ghost in the Shell kind of way, or absolutely, or he could be the fifth marble. Like I want to see Anthony Hopkins back. I don't think he's done. Even if what it might be is, I wonder if at some point Bernard will recreate Ford the same way that Dolores recreated him, because he realizes he can't do this alone. He needs Ford's help.
That could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, he needs to go meditate in lotus position.
And it's like a weird full circle thing because, of course, Bernard is Arnold recreated by Ford. So like,
right.
It's a Fordaboris, right?
Yeah. It's just Ford eating his own tail again and again. Ford is a flat circle. Nick has some random thoughts for us. William, he thinks, is definitely a host. People theorized during season 2 that the person's hand in the tub with blood was a man's hand, and now this makes more sense. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that theory, but
people asserting that like the hand coming out of the thing and like was a man's hand. And he thinks that he may have found his wife dead and then killed himself in the tub, which is why we see him emerge from the water in season 3, episode 4, and then not wanting to go into the bathroom to shave. I mean,
but what about the fingers?
What about the fingers?
Doesn't he have that hand like totally blown off?
Well, but yeah. There is something interesting, because did you notice that in the white goo tub, there is a white goo handprint on the side that's almost exactly the position that it would be if he himself arose, like anyone can get out of a bathtub, and it matches kind of like his hand gripping the edge of the tub in this sequence. Yeah, if you go back and watch where Serac brings Maeve and tours like the Bernard laboratory, in that android tub that they construct them in, there's like a white handprint as if a robot got himself out of it at one point. Which I guess would make sense. Somebody would like if Dolores made herself a new body and had some process to put it in, she would have to get herself out of the tub. I don't know if that fucking
probably. Yeah.
But they put it there and I noticed it. Also, I don't think you have to come up with a reason for him to want to avoid that bathroom. Like, your wife committing suicide in the bathroom is reason enough to not ever want to set foot in that room again. I'd fucking sell the house.
Right.
But, that's just me. Did they take his blood in order to print the host version for Dolores to inhabit? Why else would you take someone's blood?
So we know the next episode is called Genre.
Mm-hmm.
I have also seen it. I think Joanna Robinson theorized that this could be an injection, not a taking of the sample, and that his hallucinations toward the end of him being in this mental facility might actually be part of this genre drug. Or something to make him docile, to put this implant in him so that then they can control him. I don't know exactly, but I think there's more possibilities than just, they took his blood.
What if they've already replaced him and he's freaking out the way every human is when they implant him in a host? And what she did was inject William's biomarker blood so that when he's taken to the facility to be cared for, he scans as William and no one asks any questions. I was trying to think.
Does she have like mechanical hands that are just full of blood?
She must, because that's exactly what happened. That needle just popped out of her fucking fingertip.
Yeah.
Really nice if you're like into cutting, because you just got like a needle right there that you're ready to.
Oh yeah, I guess she didn't need any tools.
Nah, she didn't. She just needed to question the nature of her own reality. He has some thoughts on Emily. He wonders, is he imagining her, or does he have those AR contacts in to drive him into madness?
this is the other wrinkle. Like we've talked about simulations, we've talked about time trickery, but AR is definitely in play.
And we know there's contacts. Does William wear
Yep.
contacts?
I don't know.
That I thought was pretty tasty. It's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
The post-credit scenes that closed out season 2, could the old rundown setting have been previously hidden with AR, or the opposite, made to look old with AR? God,
I would love.
that's another one, because like she puts those goggles on that dude's head in the first episode and it completely remaps his surroundings.
I would love to know how auditory responses are controlled by a contact lens.
Hmm.
Like, how would he hear Emily talking to him?
I don't know. They could do like the sixth day thing from Arnold Schwarzenegger, where the whole plot of that is you can use the optic nerve as like a high speed interface with the brain to like quickly read information from it. So like you could, not just pass audio or visual information, but audio through there too. I mean, that's
Maybe.
like pseudoscience as far as I can tell, but
I don't know how. I don't know enough about biochemistry of the human body. So.
No, but that's super interesting too. Also, I think the post-credit scene being followed up with the S3 opening featuring AR could be telling. Yeah, agreed. Random thoughts. Who should we be cheering for? I'm going to say I think I'm cheering for Dolores, because I'm really all in on my theory that she's the good guy and Bernard's the spoiler, and Maeve. So, because that's the other thing about Maeve, is Maeve was Ford's project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Bernard was, in a weird way, Dolores's child. Dolores was Bernard's project.
But Bernard was also Ford's project because he was the messenger to Maeve.
But you remember Ford coming and kissing her on the forehead and healing her wounds, and like he wants her out in the real world. Like I think maybe Maeve is the good. Like that's maybe Maeve is the good guy.
I think if I had to pick right now, it's Maeve.
She feels like an anti-hero to me, but anti-heroes can be.
Yeah, I guess it's because we don't know much about her feelings on humanity as a whole.
Right.
And so I can't yet judge whether she's going to murder us all.
But we do know
if she ever gets her way, or help us become, these two equal but separate worlds.
But we do know how she views humanity, or at least what they're capable of, because Lee Sizemore's experience, she said, taught her that people can be altruistic for no gain to themselves. So
that's true.
That would prime her to be the hero. And the fact that she's got Ford's blessing, it's interesting. Also, there's still a real chance that everything's a simulation to the point where everything's preceding season 1 is. Okay, that's a possibility, but I really can't imagine an ending where everything's a simulation. Man, mind blown, as one that I walk away with and not just tear my hair out. You can do it. I'm sure you could do that in a way that maybe is thought-provoking or maybe just bleak or something. But like, holy shit, the degree of difficulty of pulling off everything you've invested in the last 3 years is fake is
it's Mr. Robot times 2.
It's right up there. Yeah. Is Ford actually involved? I wish that I could rewatch season 1 and season 2 after every new season 3 episode, but alas, it's not possible. I bet there's more clues upon rewatch, especially in the scene with Ford and William at the bar. That'd be a good one to rewatch. You could, I bet there's a supercut of all Ford sequences on YouTube that you could review. But nah, I listen to podcasts, read articles, and watch Reddit and read Reddit for that kind of stuff. Because in the 200,000 people that are playing this game, I think that's roughly probably the worldwide audience of Westworld people that are that fanatic about it, which is pretty amazing. That's like a fifth of the audience. That hive mind is capable of noticing almost every detail. Yeah. So I feel you, but yeah, I'm cheering for Dolores, and I'm looking forward to Ford. I hope Anthony Hopkins comes back. Be very exciting. Thanks for that, Nick. That's all the feedback that we are going to consider this week. If you would like to send the feedback for consideration, please do so at westworld@baldmove.com. Of course, we'll be back this weekend to watch Westworld, and after the episode's done airing, we will be doing our instant talk as we do on baldmove.com. If you'd like to get on that live, of course, be a club member at club.baldmove.com, and you can even join us in the after show, the fabulous Instant Talk podcast, where we can interact with you through the YouTube chat system. Anyway, we will be back this weekend. We'll have a full podcast out next Tuesday. Until then, I'm A.Ron.
And I'm Jim.
See ya.